Okay, rant number two, or review number two, if you will. I'm going to be beating a dead horse with a stick. This is my review of Spawn within the last few years. I'm going to range this in between the Armageddon story arc up until what's going on now in the stories. Um, there's a lot that I could say that's been addressed wrong with Spawn in the past, and a lot of people know about it. People watching Spawn Year with Captain Logan know exactly what's going on in the past, and some of this very stuff will probably be tackled later on towards the end of this year. But this is just me as a long-time reader of Spawn who's just had a lot built up, want to go ahead and get it off my chest, and hence this review that I'm doing here. There's a lot that could be said, too, about Todd McFarlane and the way that he works and the way that he works with Spawn. I think the only thing new that I could bring to the table was just sort of the realization that I've had of figuring him out over the years, which is that, alright, besides the obvious things that I can say good about him, there is no doubt that he is a spectacularly talented artist. His work on the book is probably some of the best comic book artwork that you're going to see, especially with the high watermark that he left on the story in the 90s. His storytelling, however, is absolutely batshit all over the place. It's actually, his storytelling ability is kind of like his articulation. It's all over the place, and there's no sense of a solid path through to where he wants to go. And I thought that the problem is that visually wise, McFarlane always was able to sell his gimmick, but he didn't understand it. I further realized that he doesn't understand it, and that he is kind of a prick about it a little bit, also in the way that he does his business. McFarlane made a lot of poor choices in the way that he decided to work with people who contributed to his stories, and for that, his mythology has suffered a little bit, not just because of his own inability as a writer, but just for all the problems that he's had with Neil Gaiman, and even the way that he kind of handles some folks who come along and introduce some really brilliant aspects to the story. He just kind of sweeps them under the rug and decides to do his own thing. The best definition of him is probably as a kid who invites you over to play a little bit of God of War. You get there, and he said, I need some help here. I need to get past a certain level. So I'm sitting there, I'm playing as Kratos, and I'm going to go and I'm going to complete missions in a certain way, and I'm going to get to a certain level, and then I get done and go home. And then come to find out somebody, or this person was not satisfied with the way I played the game, so he's going to go back, erase everything I've done, and just completely redo everything over again in a different fashion. That's pretty much the way McFarlane operates. His writing in Spawn is pretty much equivalent to a game of Jenga. Writers come in there, they know the exact points of where to pull one of the sticks out of the bottom, set it on top and not topple the foundation. Todd comes along, takes one of the sticks out from one of the most necessary places for the foundation to be able to stand after he takes his turn, and sets it on top, and the series sits very precariously. And this is pretty much how I feel about that. Now, since the thing is retcons built upon retcons, he was not entirely in on the Armageddon story arc, which is where I'm going to start off. He let somebody else come in there, do majority of the writing for it, topple the foundation, and we're going to start building back up for another game. When Armageddon came along, well, I kind of have to background how I read Spawn over the last few years. I stopped reading Spawn on a regular basis probably when I was 19, at least in the monthly set. I just got tired of a lot of the way that, as with the problems I've addressed, the series goes. Any revelations or kind of progress will be either relapsed within an issue or two of said progress happening, or there will be something else that comes along later on, and we might have a very minute development which gradually sticks with the story and stays in the atypical canon. When Armageddon finally rolled around, I started reading it on a monthly basis when a new writer was on, and it probably wasn't until the last 3 issues of that series that McFarlane decided to come back and build a little bit more on what had been done after the story took place. In the past, we were treated to the revelation that Al and his costume are actually bonded with a lot of other souls, which are known as the Legion. Not to be confused with the Forgotten, the bunch of angels that neither sided with heaven or hell during Satan's rebellion, which was what Mammon was after and Al was somehow the key to. And Mammon kind of figures into this since he killed Bolgi, and Mammon becomes a bit of the reoccurring villain throughout the Spawn series from that point on. He has a bunch of souls housed within him, apparently, who died at the same time he did, and they really step out into a bigger role once Armageddon comes along. There's also the revelation, too, that Wanda and Terry had 2 more kids sometime later after Cyan, named Jake and Kate. Well, the thrones of heaven and hell have seen the absence of God and Satan for some time, and then when the Man of Miracle steps in, one of God's angels who had been locked away because she's batshit insane shows up at the Fitzgerald house with Al right there when Jake and Kate are going crazy, and actually reveals them to be God and Satan. Zero the angel takes God back to heaven, and they're going to kickstart Armageddon by doing the rapture and collecting up the souls to fuel heaven's army. Kate, who is Satan, was taken back to hell, and she is talked into sinking California into the ocean to gather up more souls for Hell's army, and this is where the Battle of Armageddon begins. Get a lot of interesting stuff going on. We get a repetition of the 10 plagues of Egypt, which are done in there. There's a zombie apocalypse. The take on the 4 horsemen as these Tokugawa monsters is pretty cool. There's a lot of this cool stuff happening, and all of the souls that dwell within inside Al come out as new hell spawns and help to combat many of the threats which are taking place. This is probably... Now, there's still some character relapse going on in here. You know, Terry and Wanda pretty much had their fill of Al's presence in their life, and it's quite understandable. And the entire family winds up being the last ones that Al protects before everything just completely explodes and the world is gone. Man of Miracle steps in, leads Al to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which was the tree that Adam and Eve bit the fruit from. He fights his way through these upgraded redeemers who call themselves disciples and are in fact the 12 disciples of Jesus. There's some history laid out about God and Satan's role in the course of things, as well as the Man of Miracles, who happen to be Jesus as well. Al dies, is reborn as this uber-powered God, goes out, fights heaven and hell's forces, defeats the Mad Angel, doesn't actually take on Mammon, but defeats the right-hand demon that was working for him, takes care of God and Satan, rebuilds the world up in an event which is called the White Light, and eventually goes on to set out to reclaim Wanda as he had always intended to. Man of Miracle stops him and fills him in on this nasty little revelation that on the night before he did leave out and was going to be killed, Wanda was pregnant. And he wound up punching her in the stomach because that she was pregnant. And that's the big explanation for it. The spirit of this child will come up to later be a problem again with Mammon. But as soon as the story is over with, McFarlane is back on for the 3 issues. And while there's a lot of action that kind of progresses what is seemingly a good event leading off into a retcon, Al goes back into sitting on his ass in the alley and brooding, having given up all the powers. This is probably the best that I've seen Spawn, or at least the run of Spawn within the 2000s. It's the most progressive story, event-wise, character-wise, not doing so hot. This will lead off into the worst tier in between this and the start of Jim Downing showing up, which is a bunch of 2 to 5 issue story arcs, which are just filler material, which kind of halfway, or I should say very half-ass, deal with Mammon and flesh out his influence on not just Al Simmons' life itself, but just the entire Simmons generation, and the idea that the unborn child that he killed from Wanda winds up being this mysterious hooded figure who was helping Mammon. I think this goes on for the course of 18 issues, just a little bit before 185. And this is some of the worst reading that I have had to endure out of Spawn in that time. Now, there are some good ideas brought in there. I like the idea of Mammon having always been influenced on the Simmons line, but then again, this is something that, you know, if this series was more progressive, it should have been dealt with a long time ago as opposed to now. Let's just suffice to say that it's a lot of bullshit, and finally, Mammon and said child are dealt with and sealed off somewhere to where they can never come back. Which is going to bring up a contradiction, too, because in the course of the story, supposedly when Al had the godlike power and remade the world, he sealed off all the portals to heaven and hell. Well, we kind of had an accident, and somehow Clown kept a portal to hell open inside an apartment building where a lot of the tenants were just going absolutely insane. And this kind of leaves hell's influence to leak back into the earth. Al's had enough of it, can't take it anymore, and then after just a lot of everything, there was at least some progress with his character starting to possibly develop a relationship with the Wiccan girl named Nyx, who has kind of been an ally to him. He goes off, finally blows his head off, and it's like the shot heard round the universe, which triggers Jim Downing, the new Spawn, stepping into the picture. Now, out of the course of these things, the last story arc is just absolutely terrible. Unfortunately, it will be required reading to get on up into what's going on within the last couple of years with Jim Downing now. So Jim Downing shows up. Apparently, this is a point where McFarlane does something worse than wiping out somebody else's continuity. Almost 20 years later, McFarlane decides to go back to the beginning and start pulling in everything over the course in between issues 185 up until 230, which actually came out this week. Jim Downing was actually a soul that, after Al released most of them, apparently one decided to stay behind just in case something happened, and the costume is bonded to him, and he awakens up like Al in the past with fragmented memories, but all these awesome powers to where he can heal, and he's got the crazy-ass costume bonded to him. This is the thing that McFarlane, you know, he's got a lot more input from 185 on up till now. He said that he always wanted to take and turn Spawn into more of an urban myth and just kind of deal with Spawn's presence in the world from people's perspectives. And at least in that regard, it does pretty good. But unfortunately, this transitions with Jim's introduction into Spawn turning into... I think what he kind of wanted to envision was the X-Files, but which is a really good idea in a lot of respects, and especially aesthetically, because the artwork just takes on this kind of noirish style, but with color to it. This turns into the X-Files, which moves at the speed of one of the DBZ sagas. And it's slow going in a lot of areas. Now, there are some interesting developments along the way, but then they really pale when McFarlane decides to start, and some of the writers that work with him decide to start introducing other aspects into the picture, which kind of spell out too much. With the Jim Downing coming into the picture, we go with new beginnings. We get reintroduced to Jason Wynn, who pretty much has some ties to his past. Jim Downing was actually the white man that Al turned into back in issue 3 for the first time that he laid eyes on Wanda. This is brought into the picture. Clown is brought back. Big spoiler out of issue 200. although they kind of dragged ass with it, was that somehow Malboja had come back into the equation in the Freak's body. That happens. Clown's working with some vampires. Heaven has its own agendas. And it just kind of free-for-alls through this. Now, what's more interesting about this long-tiered saga of Spawn in general is the fact that it actually has people in the world knowing now that Al Simmons was the one who caused the White Light event. Heaven and hell are real. Demons and angels are real. His faith healing, which he actually decides to get crazy enough to go on a live TV show and perform faith healings, draws people to start understanding that everything that they ever thought about religion in the world is absolutely true now, and that some of the stuff that they always knew about has been kind of eschewed and not entirely been put into the truth. This is really good in a lot of ways. It's probably the most progressive that I've seen, and I actually enjoyed this new Spawn more in the last 30 issues than I have with the 100 and something that we've spent with Al Simmons all that time. However, where this thing starts to fall apart, as I said, is that it is a very slow-paced spelling out of things. We come in here, and Jim's starting to give in to the costume's ideals, and it's kind of a point where Clown walks up and introduces himself to him and starts teaching him all of these ideals about how the costume works. And then we're going as slow as we possibly can, building up progress to any type of storyline that's going on. Clown comes along, he has his own agenda. The vampires have their own agenda. Malboja has his own agenda. There are some representatives from Heaven that come in that start having their own agendas in some ways. Hell, just recently the Catholic Church is actually interested in what's been going on with Spawn too. But there's a lot of the stuff that's being introduced out there, and again, this gleams too much into the past. McFarlane still once again has no idea what to do with this. And it's just kind of finally to where I realized that, like the kid who is upset when you do things he doesn't want with the video game, McFarlane will start to come back and kind of retcon things or relapse characters within an issue or two of each other. This has been happening. Granted, it's not been happening as frequently as it's been in the past, but it's still happening, and this is kind of the frustration that I'm still having with the character right now. There's some other characters that get introduced into this. We still deal with Sam and Twitch. There's this girl named Sarah who is kind of Jim's Wanda, but also has Granny Blake's faith. There's just a lot of stuff going on with other characters too, and it's just absolutely frustrating to take seriously with cognitive thinking skills. I will say the best thing about this series is that after Al decided to take himself out of the picture, at least Terry, Wanda, and Cyan have been given a break. This is really the greatest thing about this new series, is that we no longer focus on them. Now, they're still a part of the universe, but the fact is we haven't seen them in a couple of years, and, given a lot of the shit that they've been through with Al, I hope we don't see them again for a long time if they decide to bring them back into the picture, because God knows they need a break. I don't think I've seen any characters in a story go through as much turmoil as they have. So I'm at least glad that we're letting them kind of just settle on their own out of the picture. As far as it goes with this new tier of Spawn, it's okay if you have a lot of patience with this, or you just kind of a lapsed reader who does in the way I do and just picks up the book every so often. This does have some developments to it. Now, granted, they are not as frequent, but at least there's a little bit more going on here. The path is becoming a little bit more coherent, so there is that. As far as it goes with this last tier of Spawn, unless you just absolutely been a hardcore Spawn fan and you haven't read this in a long time and you want to go back through it,